Welcome everyone to Coffee Time with CastleHill. We have a special guest today, well, two special guests today, Mike Duggan, who's my business partner at CastleHill, as well as Jonathan Ehret, who's from Risk Recon. We're going to talk a little bit about third-party risk management, a little bit about Risk Recon, a little bit about industry trends, all of those fun things. So why don't I have you gentlemen introduce yourselves? So Mike, do you want to start? And then we'll hand it over to Jonathan.
Sure. Mike Duggan, again, one of the managing partners here at CastleHill. I'm Tim's business partner, lead that third-party risk management practice that we have here at CastleHill.
Jonathan?
Sure. John Ehret, VP of Strategy and Risk at Risk Recon. I really appreciate you guys having me here to talk third-party risk. It's a topic near and dear to my heart, so I'm looking forward to this conversation.
I'm just going to keep calling you Jonathan to keep it formal. Don't worry. Sorry.
It's all good.
Excellent.
Very
So, Mike, you want to kick off some of the questions?
Sure, absolutely. So, John, when you think about third-party risk management, lots of different ways of getting here in getting into this industry. How did you end up in third-party risk?
Sure. So, honestly, I'm a child of the '80s, so it started with war games. As any good computer geek from the '80s got interested in computers because of war games. Then I saw sneakers, and I was hooked. In the early '90s in security, and I happened to be working in a major international bank at the time, and opportunity popped up in security, and I was like, I'm finally going to get my chance to get into security, and it happened to be third-party risk, and it was new at the time, and it was just growing, and absolutely fell in love, and it fits my personality. I'll say that.
Mm-hmm. Which kind of leads into the next question that we generally go is, what keeps you interested in third-party risk? What is it that's, interesting about it?
Sure. And by nature, I mean, if you talk to my wife, she'll tell you that I'm a tinfoil hat wearing paranoid guy who constantly looks at everything that could possibly go wrong in any situation, including with the kids, which I think drives her bonkers. But that's what I love about third-party risk, right? It's not that aspect of security where you're just running the firewall, running access management. It's kind of taking all these different hats in security and throwing them on one head and sticking you out in the wild and saying, okay, tell me where something is going to go wrong. Look at all the possible scenarios. Sometimes you're looking at stuff and it's a very technical thing, and it's a firewall that's wrong or poor network design. Sometimes you're walking into a data center and there's windows or there's, crazy things that you see. And it's just all these different aspects of security all jumbled into one. And it allows you to, I guess it's a different scenario every time, right? Each new vendor is something different. I think if I, was in the more regimented, we're just monitoring a firewall all day long, it would probably be very difficult for me, but it lends itself very well to my personality of abject worry about fear and that sort of thing, and the tinfoil hat, and allows me to go in and really just kind of, and I think it fits my personality as far as being able to talk to people, because I love to share and talk and help people. And, third-party risk is one of those things where you're working directly with your vendor, and hopefully it's not adversarial. It's a way to help them get better along the way. So you kind of feel like you're doing good, especially when you're working at the time for, major international banks. You'd always don't feel like you're the one doing the most good in the world. But here you're able to help your vendor population get better and reduce their risks, and in turn reducing yours.
Yeah, I think it's pretty interesting too. One of the things that we've found in this practice is in supporting all these clients, we're working with stakeholders all day too, right? Internally, a lot of business folks that really have no risk background whatsoever. Right. They don't think about their vendors in terms of risk or the services they're using. More and more, we're diving deeper and deeper. We find in the practice that we're running into a lot of fourth party, a lot of service where the service is being provided from, geographic concerns, more and more compliance, where now compliance is suddenly thinking a little differently than they have in the past in these companies. I do think there's so many facets of it. It touches so many areas that it goes beyond just the pure technical side of things. A lot of operational risk as well.
Yeah, and it brings in a certain type of individual too, right? It's not, when you think security, you think, guys just hammering away on code or that sort of thing, and they don't get a lot of sunlight, they drink a lot of Red Bull, but and then you think of auditors who are kind of this, I'm out to get you on every sort of thing, and it's it's an equal combination of those two personalities. That's the only way to, and with all that, then you throw in another part salesman, right? Because you have to be able to not necessarily sell a product, but you have to sell what you're telling, you know, you're trying to get a business owner or a vendor to buy into why you think that's a risk. And it's just this unique set of characteristics, which is probably why it's very tough to actually hire for third-party risk roles and find the right person, because it's not just an auditor, it's not just a techie, it's someone who, I'm gonna think of it, you know, like in the movie Office Space, the one Bob who took the recommendations from the business area and took them to the engineers. It's like that translationary stage. To being able to talk multiple languages effectively in different scenarios, I think that's what's really unique about the situation.
Absolutely. For us, we're starting to see more and more. It used to be heavily financial services, right? Third-party risk, because naturally risk and compliance in that space, heavily regulated industry. We're seeing more and more of this cross-industry stuff starting to come together, where industries we would never even have thought of, we're suddenly getting calls from, and they're implementing programs now, highly focused programs, but it's still at the same time. There's seems to be a lot more cross-industry activity going on. What are you seeing out there in terms of cross-industry?
Absolutely seeing the same thing, right? You know, it started in finance because everyone was worried about their money. Then it went to healthcare because everyone was worried about their health records and all the stuff that was regulated, those industries. But now it is getting into all these other areas, stuff that you never thought about, people that don't, or industries that don't have personal identifiable information or PHI or anything like that, but they have intellectual property. And companies are starting to realize that, hey, their personal data is their IP. And that's the stuff that's sometimes worth way more than the PII and PHI and that sort of stuff. And you look at a company like Tesla, who had one of their vendors breached last year or year before, and they probably never thought about third-party risk. But one of their vendors was breached, and they've lost a lot of IP. So companies are starting to get into that. I've before coming to Risk Recon, I ran a nonprofit, and we had membership from 80 different international companies, and there's companies there you never would have expected to be caring about third-party risk. Folks in the entertainment industry and then that sort of stuff, where they're creating animation, and that's their IP, and that's like gold to them. And they want to know what happens at their vendors, because the bad guys aren't stupid. They realize that these big companies are fortifying their walls very well, and getting better every day. But a lot of the times that same data goes to the vendor and it's not protected adequately. So, why try and knock down the gigantic wall when you can, I think of it like the Three Little Pigs. I wouldn't be able to knock down the brick house, but I can go over to the one that's made out of straw and blow it down real quick and get in. So
is there any industry anymore that's not focused in the area? Especially with the cyber, the opportunity for cyber risk exposed through a third party or other pieces.
I don't think there's any one industry that's just completely out of it.
Yeah.
I think you're getting pockets of every industry that's suddenly getting into it, and they're all doing it at different levels and different maturities. And some of them it's just the contract language. Some of them it's let's do an actual assessment. Some of them are surprisingly more mature than even some of the ones in the financial institutions that what they're doing. So yeah, I think everyone is quickly realizing that you have to protect your what's important to you, whether it's IP or customer data. It's not just about reputational risk anymore. It's about company survivability.
It's a good point about the customer data. Interestingly enough, we're starting to see a lot in the retail and apparel space, which is one of those industries that you say, what exactly is your risk there? What around this? And they're realizing that customer data is wildly valuable, right? That's everything that they want, and that's really what everybody wants to get after. So protecting that customer data is pretty important to them. So they're starting to put these programs into place. We're seeing more and more of it.
I mean, think about it. We live in a world where the greatest commodity is data now. It's all these companies that say they do one thing. They're really just monetizing the data that they collect about everybody. All these free services and that's huge swaths of data. And if it's being made available to a third party, then they're putting that organization at risk. So I think people are quickly waking up to the fact that what's going on. And then we have things that the healthcare space, like what's currently going on with the vaccine companies, they're being targeted by nation states that want intellectual property, and they're being forced to think about protecting their supply chain and all that sort of stuff. So and I'm thankful, since I love third-party risk and I made my life out of it. I'm thankful to see the emphasis finally being put onto third-party risk, and not just, hey, that's the crazy cousin you see at the wedding that no one really wants to talk to, leave him in the corner at the kids' table. But we're quickly moving up off that kids' table to maybe at least someplace less prime, but in the middle of the wedding reception.
It's a great way of putting it.
I think Jonathan, your point about the vaccine companies is very important, because having worked in the pharmaceutical industry professionally, the situation that you get up with some of those folks where you're into the research and development, and this is true across a lot of different types of companies in both the government sector, obviously in the financial, but pharmaceutical and healthcare. Those are the folks who resist these programs in many cases, right? So they're off doing their own types of research in different areas, and yet it's really important that they be brought into the corral, that they to use the same analogy, they get off the kids' table, because they're also those folks who have the most cutting edge IP. They have the most. In some cases, they're using data that's typically much more sensitive, or using tools now that are available in other places. So I think that's a really, it's not just that basic go after the corporate information, like you said. It's you're going after individuals who may be using third parties, and the hub and spoke of third party risk management has become so much deeper than it was before.
Yeah, and we're seeing in other industries too. Even the DoD with the implementation of the CMMC. For years you could look at, hey, the U.S. just released the latest stealth aircraft, and then 18 months later, the Chinese have one that looks remarkably the same as the U.S. one that was evidently developed in secret. There's a big emphasis there to protect supply chain, and not just the actual, the Boeings of the world and that, but all the little guys that touch all those things. So it's good to see, and it's going to be an interesting time next few years in third-party risk for sure.
Sure. It's actually a nice lead in. TPRM industry as a whole, what are the challenges you're seeing out there, and maybe from a Risk Recon perspective as well? What are the types of things you're seeing biggest challenges?
Well, staffing is always a challenge in third-party risk. Both of our companies probably wouldn't exist if staffing wasn't an issue, right? Yeah, in 16 years in third-party risk, I was a part of teams that were very small, 1 to 2 people. I was a part of teams that were very big with 15 to 20 people doing on-site assessments, 25 on-site assessments apiece. And at no point in time did we ever feel overstaffed. Even when you're doing 400 on-site assessments per year, you were still crunched with time. There's so much going on. It's businesses don't slow down in their outsourcing efforts. They're always looking for the next new thing to bring in to draw in new customers. So it's much easier to just go pick one off the shelf than to try and build it yourself. So we're constantly bringing in new vendors, and that the lag on FTE time, is at best a year, right? Hey, we've added 50 new vendors. Well, you're not going to get a new FTE till next year at least. So you're going to have to deal with it. And by next year, you're already 50 behind, and then they add 50 more. So it's, resource challenges are very tough. Just the nature of third-party risk, and we're all in it to get visibility, and true control effectiveness in the stuff we're looking at is always a challenge. If it's solely questionnaire based, you're at the mercy of either the CISO who filled out the questionnaire, or the crazy marketing guy who filled out the questionnaire and wanted, or the sales guy who wanted to get that check coming in right away. So we'll just say yes to everything and pass off.
The yes bomb.
The yes bomb, yes. I've received the yes bomb numerous times.
Yeah.
Wow, you can answer a questionnaire in 9 minutes and get it back to me, and wow, everything is yes. That's amazing. So.
Yeah, it's amazing. That's in attaching documentation as well. Wow.
Yeah.
You know how fast that happened.
Yeah, that's when you look at the policy docs, and it says insert name here for the name of the company. It was just downloaded, and I've seen that a few times. It's always entertaining.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We see a very similar thing, right? It's the challenge is always prioritizing the work, right? Yeah. You've got new vendors coming in, you've got reassessment cycles kicking off, and it's a never-ending flow. And the volume only seems to be increasing, never seems to be going down. And to your point, there never seems to be enough resource to handle it all. And then there's always the risk of that you're holding the business back, that you're not able to move things fast enough.
Yep.
You're holding up the process, and it's always a tough challenge, something to manage internally, because the expectations are, especially with newer programs, less mature programs, I never had to do this before. Why do I suddenly have to do this now?
Right. And I'm sure you guys deal with that with the customers you deal with, where they're looking to implement third-party risk and do all this sort of stuff. And, you're trying not to be the brick wall. You kind of want to be the speed bump. But yeah, it's a challenge. It's tough. Implementing a new program is one of the hardest things you'll probably do in third-party risk.
Yeah, it's being pragmatic. We're always focusing on that, right? Because there's so much information out there now. It's all out there and available to you. There's conferences, there's constant webinars, everything else that goes along with it. And I always tell people, in an ideal world, if I were to design a program for you, it would include lots of different tools, but you'd have to have a very large budget. And most people don't have that budget. So I say, well, you have to be pretty pragmatic as to what you're going after then, based on the budget and the resources that you have, and stay highly prioritized, which is one of the reasons we always promote a product like a Risk Recon, right? It allows you to prioritize and bring things forward quickly, and keep you on track. So it's probably kind of a nice lead-in. Tell us a little bit about Risk Recon. How does it fit into a program? Where do you generally see it fitting in?
Sure.
Into a less mature program and then a more mature program.
Yeah, and Mike, just to touch on one of the things you mentioned about kind of having, if you were building that perfect program, you'd have these multiple tools. I always like to use the analogy of, if you're building a program, build it like a Swiss Army knife. You're going to get a bunch of different tools that are going to inform you about what your vendor is doing. Not the other way is to build a scalpel, which is what a lot of people do. They just have a security questionnaire. It does one thing, send it out once a year, and that's it. And that's where I think Risk Recon really fits in and shines. We're not the replacement for that security questionnaire. In most cases, if you're really strapped for resources and you need to just get a quick hit on a vendor, then yeah, that's possible. But I look at us really as a visibility increaser. We fit in numerous cases. It's not just for the super mature company. The immature companies can utilize us as well. But if you're sending out that security questionnaire, you can use a tool like Risk Recon to before you even send the questionnaire, look at what maybe the posture says about that vendor. Maybe they have some areas that they're really bad. So maybe I'll increase the emphasis on my questionnaire. I'll ask for additional evidence, more sampling, whatever, when I send that questionnaire out. Then when it comes back, look at maybe you've asked them about patching, and hey, they're going to say yes, and they're probably going to give you a patching policy, and they're going to give you 2 or 3 screenshots where maybe patching succeeded at this organization. As a practitioner, you have to make that determination. Is that control actually effective or not on a really small subset of information, especially if it's a large company. So you can use a tool like Risk Recon to say, okay, if you've said patching is good, you've said, here's my patching policy and here's my 2 screenshots. Well, what does a tool like Risk Recon say? It's Risk Recon operates from the outside looking in. We don't do any active scanning. It's all passive scanning and crawling of externally facing systems. But we're able to build a really good profile of what's externally facing on that organization. And maybe, they said patching is good, but maybe we see a bunch of stuff that's, end of life software, critical vulnerabilities, you name it, that they never told you about. So, we're able to take your security program using your questionnaire and really supercharge it and say, okay, these controls actually are effective, or maybe, it was the crazy sales guy filling it out and geez, nothing is in place. And, we better have a conversation with that vendor. That's a great use case. We mentioned RFPs, which are a challenge in security, especially third-party risk. If you're understaffed, you can't do 5 reviews on a vendor on 5 different vendors for an RFP and then pick one, because you're going to waste 80% of your time. So you can use a tool like Risk Recon to pull a high-level posture, cyber hygiene rating of each of those vendors and say, you know what, because in the end, the business is going to make the decision on the RFP anyways, but you can say, hey, this one guy looks really bad. We might want to just completely discount him. These other maybe 3 are all about the same and one guy really shines, and you can at least have that input without, burning weeks trying to assess a bunch of vendors, of most of which you're never going to do business with.
Well, and burning bridges, right? You never know if you'll
Yeah,
do business with them in the future.
right, right.
And putting somebody through an RFP process, they put a lot of time and energy into that. There's a lot of cost
Yeah,
associated with not only running an RFP but responding to it. So to then put them through a vendor-facing assessment would not probably be
oh yeah, it's
you know,
brutal.
it would be brutal, right?
Yeah,
I
yeah,
know one of the other places that leads into is the a lot of times people will actually dumb down those assessments for that situation, right? Because
yep,
back to your point, you don't have the resource, you don't have the time, or you may be dealing with people you don't know well, and so Risk Recon gives you that immediate intelligence, like you said, right? So now you can actually ask an important question during the RFP process that may disqualify somebody from consideration quickly, as opposed to dumbing it down for everybody and hoping that and having to do it again. It's
yeah.
sort of wasted effort.
And Tim, that's exactly what I've done in the past in my previous practitioner life before I jumped to the vendor side. We did that exact same thing. We picked probably 10 heavy hitter questions, like the stuff that would really freak you out if someone said no to, like, we don't have security program. We don't, the stuff you really care about. And then we use Risk Recon to get that, okay, they said yes to this stuff. There's nothing that really that freaks us out, but let's get an idea of what their hygiene looks like and not put them through that arduous, long security questionnaire process. So yeah, definitely that is a fantastic way to utilize the tool.
So thinking about the Risk Recon product, we're partnered with Risk Recon where we love the product. We promote the product, obviously.
Thank you.
There's a couple of different products inside of Risk Recon.
Sure.
It's not just one. And then I guess the next thing is what makes it a little bit unique. There's a lot of risk rating companies out there, right? We're seeing more and more of them pop up
Every day.
The competitive landscape has got to be insane. It's good that you got in early, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's so give us a little bit about that. I think it's informative. It'd be informative for people to understand what it does, what it doesn't do, what it's meant
Sure.
to do, and how it can be affordable as well.
Sure. From a product perspective, there's really kind of two ways to look at it. There's the own enterprise product where our customers are monitoring themselves, right? They want to know what's going on within their own company, or maybe it's in their subsidiaries and kind of monitoring themselves. That's one piece. Typically doesn't hit the third party risk people. That's more of like your OPSEC people, your SOC and that sort of thing, but still a very valid use case. On the other side of that, we have kind of the more traditional third-party risk offering, which is broken up into kind of three different licenses. There's the what we call a Discover license, which is just a high-level, just scores for an organization, a very affordable way to look at things. There's a one-time report, which is a more in-depth report on the vendor, but it's just a snapshot in time. I want to run this report today. I want to know what my vendor looks like today. And then there's the advisor license, which is like a continuous monitoring type aspect. So our eyes are on the vendor. We're actually going out and we don't do a lot of store-bought information. Obviously, there's a small piece of our offering that is purchase threat intelligence, but we're actually collecting the data ourselves. We have a crazy system in place to go out and crawl our entire population every 10 to 14 days. So we're out there looking for everything that changes, and we're able to use those. Our customers use those tools to kind of keep tabs on a vendor, right? Because we mentioned the questionnaire is a point in time process. You do it once, and then maybe at best you're going to fill it out again in a year. So what happens in between those two assessment cycles? There's new vulnerabilities. Maybe the companies move hosting locations. All these sorts of things. You can use a tool like Risk Recon to keep tabs on your vendor, monitor them, and treat it kind of like a mini SOC, right? It's a SOC for your vendors. Essentially, you're able to go in and look at the alerts and the things that pop up, and you can address them if it's within the risk threshold that you want to deal with, or maybe it's a low risk level, and you don't want to deal with it. So, yeah, there's some great very different uses for each of those, right? We see organizations that maybe put a certain number of licenses on the continuous, maybe for their most critical vendors, but they want to keep tabs on everything else that's going on. So they'll buy like I said, the Discover license is much more affordable. They'll buy a huge swath of Discover licenses just to throw on the rest of their vendors. So if somebody like drops substantially, hey, maybe they weren't the highest risk, but we still want to know what's going on there. So then they can dig into that vendor and decide what's going on with them. So one of our sales ladies refers to it as the smoke detector. right?
That's a great way of putting it.
When there's a fire, we want to know about it. So let's go dig into it. And then, as third-party risk people, you can address what's going on with that vendor.
Right.
Proactively identify it.
Oops. And that's generally how we promote it as well, right? Where we're saying it just it's an indicator, right? It allows you to take your eyes off of things while you're focused on all this other work you have to perform, new vendor onboardings, all kinds of reassessment activity that's going on, just trying to get through the reviews that may be open. It's so hard to keep your eye on everything that's happening all the time. Again, it's impossible. You could never have enough resource to do it. So it's one of the reasons why we like the tool as well, is that it gives you something while you're taking your eyes off of those vendors to bring you back in if something's going wrong.
Yeah, I mean, we have clients monitoring, 30, 40,000 vendors, and their third-party risk teams are not staffed, to monitor 30 or 40,000 vendors if they had to do reviews on everybody. So they're using things like Discover to keep tabs on the ones that, then things that go bump in the night and react accordingly. So.
All right. So going forward, where do you see the biggest challenges in TPRM? What do you think would be some of the solutions that you'll see down the road to help with that? It's the industry is changing all the time, right? So certainly in the last several years that we've been in providing third-party risk services, we've seen enormous changes, especially with some of the privacy acts that are coming out.
Absolutely.
Everything else around it.
Yeah, I think coming out of 2020, I think third-party risk is going to get an entirely different focus. People that never thought about it are going to start thinking about it, and they're going to start reevaluating what they may or may have thought about their vendors, and that's going to translate into challenges for the third-party risk space. I do think privacy. I think you're going to start to see that. Obviously, you look at companies like OneTrust and the valuation that they have. Privacy is clearly a hot topic. I think we're going to get much deeper into that as things like the CMMC roll out, and probably things that are going to be very similar to that or piggyback on that. You're going to get a lot of emphasis on those sorts of things. And I think as the challenge, obviously this is really for people listening or for practitioners. The challenge is going to be as a practitioner. You mentioned before, and I didn't answer your question, so I'll answer it now. But there's a lot of new vendors coming into this space. It's not just industries that are suddenly realizing they need to do third-party risk. There's a lot of vendors coming into this space who are thinking, this is a jackpot, right? It's the pot of gold. I'm going to write my ticket. I'm going to put together some piece of software. A SaaS offering is going to be great, and someone's going to, it's going to make me rich. And the challenge for the practitioner is going to be to look at what those vendors are doing and really see through some of the marketing hype and know exactly what that vendor does for you and the benefits that it gives you. You mentioned the competition we face just in the continuous marketing or continuous monitoring space, and our competition is vastly different. The way we collect data versus the way they collect data, and the things that set us apart from them is vastly different. The ability to prioritize risk and not just dump 500 findings on a practitioner and say, go figure it out. We can actually prioritize those because we collect the data ourselves. I think that's what practitioners are going to have to weed through, right? Some of the marketing hype of this vendor is going to, it's the best thing since sliced bread and it's going to solve your third-party risk program, but it's not.
It's the automation, right? You're going to automate this.
That is the key. I cringe.
I cringe
when I hear automation, because I haven't figured out effectively how to remove the human element from third-party risk. At some point, AI will be smart enough to read a network diagram and tell me exactly where the faults are, but we're not there yet. And you can't automate your third-party risk program. And I have this slide deck that I used to present, kind of the evolution of third-party risk, very comical in nature. And I referred to the people that are kind of doing that automation where it's just, hey, anything that's a yes is a pass, anything that's a no is a fail.
Preferred answer.
Is the homo check the boxicus. If you're looking at like the homo sapien type thing, it's the guys are just checking the box. They don't want to actually do anything. They just want to go ahead and look like they did something and wait till the auditors come and talk to them. So that's going to be the challenge.
I agree with that. You hear a lot about it. It is true, getting through the marketing hype, right? There's a lot of product out there. Tim and I are always talking about this. There's so much software out in the space, and in talking to a lot of people, they'll come over and different conferences, they'll come over and chat with us and they'll say, so do you guys have a software? And we're like, no, there's already way too much software out there. The need for another third-party risk management software, it doesn't exist. There's already too much of it out there, and it all generally does the same stuff at the end of the day. It facilitates the process of collecting information and analyzing the information. It's a great bucket, and it helps you with the process to keep things on track. But at the end of the day, there's always going to be that qualitative component to it. I just don't think that there's a simple way of handling third-party risk purely without some sort of human intervention, without some sort of thought around what it is you're looking at and why you're looking at it. So
yeah, and even we talked about that high-level smoke detector. Someone still has to go follow up on that smoke detector when it goes off. That's an automated piece, but you still have to follow up on it and decide if it's a real risk or not.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. So I guess to kind of roll things out here and wrap it up, going forward, what's if you were to give one piece of advice to a TPRM practitioner, what would that look like? What would that sound like?
My favorite piece of advice always is go get involved. Go get into groups. Find out what's going on. Don't reinvent the wheel, right?
Mm-hmm.
Especially for those people trying to get into the third-party risk space and having no clue what they're doing. Don't go blindly. Go talk to your colleagues. Network with people on LinkedIn. Finance has been through this. Healthcare has been through this. Other industries have been through this. Network. People in this space love to share.
Sure.
It's one of the great things about security in general. I always say you could have two companies whose businesses hate each other, but you put the security guys in the room and they'll share, much to the chagrin of the lawyers. But
right.
It's get involved. Right? Go talk to people, share what you know, and learn from somebody else. At the end of the day, it's all about a rising tide raises all ships. So do that, get involved, and you'll come out stronger. And at the end of 2021,
it's great advice. There's always out there, somebody's always out there willing to share their war stories, right? So, and there's a lot of war stories, that's for sure. And it provides good context for somebody who's trying to get into the space or trying to understand what exactly they'd be taking on if they've just inherited a third-party risk management program, which often happens. We know that all too often, right, Tim?
Oh yeah.
Where
Yep.
Somebody's sitting in a room and they're like, well, this feels like a procurement function. So procurement, you just own third-party risk. Or this feels like a technology thing. So
yeah.
Somebody, either a CIO or a CISO, just ended up owning TPRM, whether they like it or not.
Yeah.
So
I did a whole presentation just on war stories. So there is war stories galore in this area, especially when you start doing on-sites. You see some really crazy, sometimes scary things.
Yeah, absolutely. It is scary. Jonathan, thank you very much. It's always a pleasure, and thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. Really appreciate it, and looking forward to doing some more work with CastleHill moving forward.
Fantastic. And again, Jonathan's with Risk Recon. You have the time, go out and check out Risk Recon. Heck of a product, and something we certainly love. So appreciate it.
Thank you guys.
Thanks, Jonathan. Cheers.
Take care.
Take care. Bye now.